Okay,
Thomas, shake the snow out of it this morning.
well, we don't have snow. There's a lot of rain coming down though, as you can see in the background,
Oh,
but no snow here yet.
We had hail yesterday.
All
Okay.
right, George.
Okay, George. Goodbye.
George,
Love you.
Bless.
God bless you, George.
you're with us in spirit.
Take care, George. God bless.
Bye-bye.
Okay, George. God bless you. Bye-bye. Thanks for calling.
Well, you guys out in LA have certainly had a very difficult week, haven't you, with the murder of the bishop? I guess, is it Bishop Dave? Is that how he's called?
Yes. Bishop Dave.
And you knew him, Ned?
Yeah, very well. The last several years, we haven't seen one another for any long period of time. But prior to that, he was a member of the Industrial Areas Foundation movement in Los Angeles. There were several centers, San Fernando Valley, the San Gabriel Valley, where Dave was vicar for the Archbishop here. And we just hung out a lot with other guys from IAF. And when he became a bishop, he got a lot more busy. And we smile sort of from place to place, and maybe have a sentence or two for one another, and then he'd be off. But he's just everything that you read about him that's positive is true in spades. This is just a horrible thing that happened, and I don't remember who started the numb thing, but boy, I'm still numb.
Yeah.
That's
They call
what I think I may have started that in an email, but I was quoting my spiritual director, Jack Steger, in saying he was numb. And of course, he worked with him quite closely too.
I think all of us probably worked closely with him. He was everywhere.
Yeah.
Mhm.
He used
I remember our auxiliary bishop, Mark O'Connell, who was made a bishop shortly after David was, but they were in the same program. They have a one week program in Rome, orientation for new bishops. And how Mark said how delightful it was to meet.
Mhm.
Well, I guess there's three bishops named O'Connell, but David was around the same time that Mark was. So,
Well, and two David, because there's David O'Connell is in Trenton.
Yeah. He was former president of Catholic University of America. Yeah.
And so I'm hearing how this has affected you guys, and he was a friend and colleague and all that. Can you imagine how the murder of your children in an elementary school must affect parents and family? I'm just not minimizing the numbness that Tommy has talked about. It makes me think of how immunized this country has become, not individually immunized, but societally, we're sort of immunized to the idea that people can be randomly killed. And it's just the saddest, sad situation. And
I think it's really anesthetized more than immunized.
You think? I didn't hear you, Tom.
I think it's more anesthetized rather than immunized.
That sounds right to me.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I agree.
I don't completely agree, because if you're a grandparent, you're going to have those moments from time to time where you get a chill as to what could happen to your grandchildren in this country.
Amen.
Tom, I have a question for you about bishops in separate residence as opposed to living at a parish. It sounded to me like Dave wanted a little more independence for travel and his projects? And is that one of several reasons to have a separate residence from a parish?
Well, he kind of inherited that residence from his predecessor. It's only a block from St. John Vianney.
Uh-huh.
And that residence was the original St. John Vianney Rectory. When what's his name? O'Callaghan. Jim O'Callaghan went to establish St. John Vianney in Hacienda Heights. He bought, the Archdiocese bought this house. It was apparently the only available one. I think it got enlarged a little bit, but it was his rectory. I don't know. He probably generally had at least one other priest, maybe two, living there, a 4-bedroom house. But the parish still owned it after they built the rectory. And O'Callaghan used it actually as his retirement residence. And then when he died, the parish, I guess, offered it the San Gabriel Pastoral Region for the residence of the bishop. So Gabino Zavala, I think, was the first bishop to reside there.
Thanks.
Now,
So, Tommy, are you going to go to the funeral?
I'm not, no. The reason I would, but my friend Karen, whom I'm staying with and helping to care for, she's too fragile for the type of crowds of that. I'm not going to leave her alone.
Okay.
She had a very close connection also with Bishop Dave and is taking it pretty hard. I mean, she's a trooper of the way she expresses herself, but I know that she'll reminisce a bit. He was pastor of Ascension. He was the one who hired her as the principal of Ascension School. And, he was very frank and upfront about all the needs and the importance of maintaining that Catholic presence in the community, and she agreed wholeheartedly. But he was on his way out from there. He was going to be assigned, I think, to, he was actually serving as pastor at both Ascension and Cabrini. They're about a mile apart. And he was going to, at that point, go to St. Michael's, which was the neighboring parish to the north. But she said, I can't agree. I don't want to sign on until I've talked with the incoming pastor. And he's had a chance to interview me. And, real interviews are always two-way streets. So, she wanted to be able to talk to him before she signed on. Well, the incoming pastor was a diocesan priest, David Ayat. And he was very, very impressive also. And so after meeting with him, he was in agreement with hiring her. He was enthusiastic about it, and she agreed to come on. She really transformed the school. But after less than a year, Dave Ayat got it into his mind that he had a vocation as a Jesuit. And so for, I don't know if it was 10 or 15 years, he was a Jesuit. And then he came back to the Archdiocese, ministered in resident, or ministered as an associate at St. Monica's. And then a couple of years ago, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he died, I think, about 6 months later. So Karen has had to now deal with the death of two very beloved pastors taken before their time, whom she did not get to know as well as she would like to. Although the interaction with Dave, continued, because Dave was such a O'Connell was such a dynamic presence there in the whole South Central LA.
Thanks for that, Thomas. I didn't know him at all, but I have been reading about him, and he impresses me as one of, or like Francis's bishops who smell of the sheep
Yeah,
well before that term and experience became fashionable. So is those of you who've known him, does that fit?
Absolutely.
Yes, yes, and triple yes. I've been with him on very many things where he just goes everywhere and he's with everybody, and he never had any way of being standoffish at all. You know, where sometimes bishops will stand apart, but he never did. He was always mixed in with the people.
Well, he was in stand-up comedy. He could make everybody feel comfortable with his little quips back and forth, and he had it all, really.
Right. Was he appointed by Francis, or was he?
Yeah,
Yes.
it was
So he,
Francis
so-
did, yeah.
so he was,
2015.
he
Yeah,
was,
it was just a real consistent, thing for him to have done, given his philosophy, as we were just talking.
right. And
He and Barron and Brennan, Joseph Brennan, were ordained bishops together. Brennan is now a bishop in Fresno, and Barron, well, we all know his career.
And I saw a comment from Bishop Barron, the sadness that he expressed at the death of his friend. Yeah, it was very touching,
It was.
very touching. And so, Tom, you said something. Is it common for a diocesan priest to become a Jesuit, and then what does he give up his Jesuitness and go back to being the diocesan priest? How does that work? I didn't know you could ever leave the Jesuits.
ask the Pope that.
Yeah,
That's
I suspect that Dave Ayat was probably a Jesuit at heart, both before and after his experience as a Jesuit. But yeah, I am too, kind of. I'm also a Benedictine at heart, so
I always said to a friend of mine who's a Jesuit, he actually teaches at Harvard Divinity School. The two high schools in Boston, they're kind of top-level high schools that are rivals with each other. Boston College High School, which is the Jesuit school, and Boston Latin School, which is a public school, but has sent more priests to the Archdiocese of Boston than any other school in the city.
amazing.
Had I gone to Boston College rather than to Boston Latin, I might well have been a Jesuit. So that kind, and the old thing when someone asked Cardinal Wright, "Are you a Jesuit?" He said, "No, but I'm literate."
right.
I heard a fair amount about David O'Connell when I lived in Los Angeles, because I was very friendly with Peter O'Reilly, Monsignor Peter O'Reilly. Yeah,
I know him well.
yeah, Peter. In fact, Peter called me the week before last, before this all happened, because we continue to keep up. And there was kind of an Irish man. It was a very interesting. There was a seminary in Ireland that trained priests, interestingly enough, given what's happening in Ireland today, for the American mission, called All Hallows College. And a lot of them went there. Peter O'Reilly went there. I think probably Liam Kidney and Jarlath Cunnane went there as well. Yeah.
Yep.
So they sent a lot of priests to Los Angeles, especially to Los Angeles, I think. So.
How did that guy who killed David, how did he get into that residence?
He had keys.
Oh, he had keys. Oh,
His
He
wife,
did handyman work there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, his wife was the housekeeper for the bishop, as I read about it. Is that right?
That's
Now,
all correct.
I'm sure that an awful lot more details are going to come out.
Yeah, what's the motivation? And that is,
Well, the rad trads have already started.
Of course.
church militant. There's someone named Jose Perez. Are you familiar with that name?
No.
He's
Uh-uh.
kind of a Satanist.
Oh.
He's not a Satanist. He's against. All its focus is on the satanic,
Mhm.
against it. And he apparently wrote something that I read on Church Militant that said, that Bishop O'Connell had been at the Bohemian Grove, and that in fact he was executed, that he was shot 3 times in the back of the head and laid on his bed with his hands up like this. So you're going to have all this kind of junk coming out,
Mhm.
Oh,
so it's unfortunate, but it's the kind of world we live in.
Yeah. Back on to 2 questions that I need to address anyway. One is my not going to the funeral. What we are planning to do is watch it, the live stream of it, and I will simultaneously celebrate Mass. So in a sense, I will be virtually celebrating that
Good for you.
funeral.
Well, that's really strong.
That'd be an idea. I talked with Jack Steger about it, my spiritual director of yesterday, I think it was. And he thought it was a good idea too.
Right. What would Hippolytus say about that?
Hippolytus would probably make very much the same comment as Raymond Burke,
Got it.
because he was that type, which is one of the other things that I just found very, very interesting, and why I chose in that fun little game that the Episcopalians do.
And you voted for him over
I
Augustine.
did vote for him over Augustine. I was in a solid minority, but
I didn't vote, but I would have voted for Hippolytus even without knowing a whole lot about him.
mhm.
I love, Tom, thank you. That article by Mary McNamara was really, really touching, I thought. And she had humor, and she kind of captured the man, I think.
Mhm.
One of the things she said was, when she went to see him one time afterwards, she said something, hardly ordinary, but at least not under investigation.
Mhm.
And when she told him this some years later, after the whole sexual thing had broken, he asked her if he could put it on a T-shirt.
Oh, geez.
She said other things about him, like, he didn't bring me back to the church, but he restored my faith in faith.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And my heart opened all by itself. He saw prayer as activism and activism as prayer. She wrote some beautiful things.
Mhm.
And he began his day before dawn, ended it after midnight, and filled almost every hour with people.
Mhm.
And if there'd been some parents he said about the sexual thing, he was advocate for women priests and married priests. If there'd been some parents in there running things, none of this would ever have happened.
Mhm.
So,
Did you say he was an advocate for women priests?
yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he
So
was.
which would have been fun at a bishop's meeting with him.
No doubt.
Well,
No doubt.
but I don't think he was in your face advocate.
No. But
Yeah.
he did say it a number of times publicly, because she referred to the time, about, once he said it, and then he said, well, there goes any idea I might have had for advancement or something.
Yeah.
Kind of made that kind of a crack, and that when she confronted with him about it later, he said, well, maybe things are beginning, when he became a bishop, after having said that publicly, maybe things are beginning to change. So sound like a extraordinary person. God rest his soul.
Amen. Jeez.
Now, to an answer to another question, Tim, about priests living alone in their own houses. I did that for a number of years when I was pastor at Our Lady of Assumption. For one thing, we had a really ratty rectory. And so I was able
Must have
to
been a bad place.
get 3 houses. Basically, all 3 of them were just across the street from the parish. And all of the priests lived in those, well, one was actually duplex, so there were 4 houses. So we lived in contact with each other, probably closer contact than most priests do in rectories, who often never see each other. But we did each one of us have our own private individual dwelling, which I thought was a very, very good arrangement. I can see the difficulties with living by yourself in somewhat isolation. But I'm sure that he had a very close relationship with Tim Nichols as the pastor of St. John Vianney. So if you saw the well, you didn't see, because I didn't record it, but when Archbishop Gomez met with the diocesan priest, Norm, you were on this.
Yes, I was.
Last, what was it, Tuesday morning? One of the points that he made, he had 2 points at the end, one of which was pleading for parishes and pastors to be more alert about security. And the other was pleading for priests living in the same parish to be more intentional in their community and to really, become something of a family, and as a example to one another, as well as an example to the people of the parish. One of the things that I picked up very, very early in my priesthood was that parishioners, by and large, even those that may not be really, really active in the parish, other than maybe minimal, they know and they can sense how well the priests get along in the rectory.
Oh, yes.
And, and that is either a source of edification to them or a source of real scandal.
Ask a question. Is along the line of what you're talking about, Tom, is for half of my Catholic life, I've been in Franciscan parishes. And I believe the rule of Francis was there must be 3 living together. They don't all have to be ordained, but, in the parish I've been in here for 20 years, there were 2 priests and a brother. And those guys were attached at the hip. I mean, they had their meals together. I know that at noontime they would all go over to the rectory, not rectory, but friary, and have lunch together. Why do diocesan priests not feel that connectedness with their brothers that are in the same parish the way, and maybe Franciscans aren't the only ones, but that's my experience.
I'll put my 2 cents worth in on that. Diocesan priests are not ordained into a relationship with a community. All religious order priests are ordained into a relationship with their religious order. In other words, they are incarnate. Well, at least the not all of them, but those that spring from, like, the traditional orders, Jesuits, Franciscans, and Benedictines, who are the source of most of them. Community life is integral to what it means to be a monk or a friar. Whereas community life is not integral to what it means to be a diocesan priest.
But I'd like to add that with the parishes that I've been in, I've made an intentional effort to build community with the pastor and with the other people that are
Yeah.
priests there, because I think that is so, so important. And
Mhm.
things like eating together, going to a movie together, or doing something together that to build a community, a sense of community between us.
Yeah.
And what's nice is people notice that. People notice that.
Yeah, and I have too. But community is something that is built into the life of a member of a religious order. In other words, it's abnormal for a Franciscan or a Jesuit or a Benedictine to live privately outside of community.
In the first millennium of the church, what you're saying applied to the parochial, the parochus, the diocesan priest. Their
Very true.
community was their wife and their children and grandchildren. And so community was built into the life of the diocesan priest, which was a real loss as a result of the option to have a family along with the ministry, I think, and nothing was ever found as a substitute for that. And I think that that's probably, well, you know, one argument for saying optional celibacy ought to be one way of exercising one's priesthood.
I think that's very much what would I say? Very much an argument, you know, a part of the discussion. Somebody somewhere is going to have to land on a decision about that. I mean, at least Francis is certainly willing to keep the discussion open, but I'm pretty sure that he's not willing to take that step, which under him would probably be schismatic. I mean, it would.
Okay, Tom.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
So you guys all have shared, and Ferric has shared, or what it was like to be a young assistant pastor in a rectory where the pastor didn't hardly give a shit about your being there. And that it was a very difficult, very, very difficult adjustment from seminary to a rectory, and okay, you're on your own. And that's kind of how it is in my parish here. Now, what is wrong? Or I hear what you're saying, Tom, but it seems that there is so much value in a feeling of community, in a sense of community with other priests or brothers. I mean, how does a young guy know what the world to do? I mean, and Lombardi talks about this Jack O'Hara, who was his first pastor, who was loving and attentive and caring for him, and it made his adjustment. And then Ferric had the opposite experience. And I don't know how you can. I don't know. I just think it would be tough as nails. I'm looking at our young assistant pastor, parochial vicar, who at a funeral 3 weeks ago, it was sad. He said, I got a text message from my pastor, from Father Cook, that I needed to go over to the hospice facility and give anointing of the sick to this person who was near death. And he said, I was working out, you know, he has a gym in the rectory. And he said, it really, and this is at the homily he gave at the funeral, he said, it really ruffled my feathers that Father Cook could have gone, but he made me go. He told me to go. But he went on to say that it was a very life-changing, positive experience for him to anoint this very young woman who was dying. And I thought, well, bold guy, you know, to say that from the pulpit, that it sort of ruffled his feathers that he was having to go do this anointing. But then the interactions of these two guys when they are together is like, well, it's like, do they hardly know each other? And so it's bothersome to me because I see the contrast with my friar friends. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what?
That contrast is very.
This was a long time ago, but we're talking about in substantial part, I think, about young priests who get into their parishes, their first parishes. And I had 3 different experiences as a deacon. I mentioned to you guys that you all know about it. The first parish was every man for himself. Bishop, our Father Bramble was the pastor, and there was a priest who was the principal of a high school, and an assistant. An assistant was always complaining, saying, "When am I going to get out of here?" The second parish that I was in was with Father Bill Trower, to whom I was sent to get broken, according to the guy who really ran the archdiocese. And that's where the first night that I was at the parish, I had a knock at the door. I think I mentioned this to you guys. And Bob Spader, I think he was in that parish, and he was standing there at the door as I opened it. And he had his other hand, one of his hands behind his back, and he said, "Hi, I just want to welcome you and introduce you to your best friend in the priesthood." And then he pulled his hand from behind him, and he had a bottle of Chivas Regal and handed it to me. And I never quite saw him. But now with the pastor, with Father Trower, we became very close friends. And he was supposed to break me. But he said, "Ned, I'm crazy. I'm traditional, but in a crazy way. But you don't be that way. You do what you're doing and just keep it up." So that was just, and then after I left, the idea of the priesthood, was officially retired by the Vatican from my obligations as a deacon. He continued to be a very close friend, and he was supposed to be the kind of guy that wasn't supposed to be that way. Mm-hmm. And I think that all of us need one another. And when Trower told me he was crazy, part of what he said was, "I don't know how to get along with people." Remember, I also told you that same night, the phone rang around 8:30, 9 o'clock, and you heard just throughout the top of the rectory, "Sons of bitches!" And then, "Hello, Father Trower at St. Dorothy's. How can I help you?"
Makes me think that there was some Chivas Regal right there.
Ned, were you a transitional deacon or permanent deacon at the time?
No, I received the call, and I said I would like to propose an alternative. I don't think I ought to be ordained at the moment now, but I'd like to be put into a low-income Spanish-speaking parish. And I'd like to find out what it's like to be in a rectory with priests and the people and all of that stuff before I make a final commitment. And I just discussed this with my spiritual director, Father Miller, etc. So
how long did you do that?
Now, a year and a half.
Unusual, isn't it?
Well, it was then. I got all kinds of grief for it. Although I had made up my mind, I was very much at peace with it, and I got it from Benjamin Hawks. Gee, he just, had me the riot act for not following the tradition. Not, why were you in here for 12 years?
Here you were pioneering, because isn't that the tradition these days?
Yeah, pastoral, yeah.
That's the expectation, yeah.
And in the third parish that I was in, there was no community, no possibility of community. The only community was between me and the principal of the school. because the pastor would leave after his 2 masses on Sunday, and we didn't see him till Saturday. His name was Padre Veta. He was a Spaniard, and never got to know him, but he basically told me in a sentence or two that I was to run the parish, and I didn't know how to run a parish, and I recruited the principal of the school, and we became very fast friends, and we thought we did a great job. But it's such a mix, you know, a mash. Sometimes Cunnane was such a friend of Father Cunnane, of Bishop O'Connell. They were just buddies. They were always together when they were, you know, able to see one another. And so there's a lot of priests like Norm, and I would have been. We needed one another, and then there are guys who seem to be just fine otherwise.
You know,
I think that the seminaries, even the Boston Seminary, I must had a couple of experiences or just videos and things that I saw recently. I don't think that I think that they are so wedded to the Tridentine model that they have neglected completely the whole aspect of community, larger community, as a theological reality, into which you know the sacraments aren't given to us; they're given to the church, and we receive them through the community. And so, you know, for example, I think some of the things I've heard here kind of happened to me, where the young priest coming in, rather than like what you were talking about, Ned, rather than getting broken, brings something to the old priest that opens him up opens his heart in a way that is quite unusual. That happened with my first pastor. He had a terrible reputation before that. He was an Irishman, actually rare in our diocese to have an Irish-born priest. Most of them are Irish Americans, because all the Irish are smart enough to go to the warmer climates if they come to America. But he had a pretty rough reputation as a terror. When I got to the rectory, what was really interesting, there were 3 other priests there. There was a 3rd floor, and there was 2 suites on the 3rd floor, and then a large room when you had to go out to the bathroom. And there was a suite on the 2nd floor opposite the pastor, which one of the priests opted not to be in, and took the room upstairs. We had to go out to the bathroom in order that he wouldn't be on the same floor as the pastor. So when I went in there, I went into that suite, and I left my door open. And the pastor would go out with his dog once a week, and he'd come back at night. And he'd come up the top of the stairs. And before he got to the very crest, he'd say, "Hello?" And I said to myself, what in hell did he do when there was no one living here? And I'd say, "Monsignor, come on in." And he'd come in. Sometimes it was, you know, I had to take the dog had gotten into a skunk or something like that. And he'd sit down and he'd fall asleep. And 11 o'clock, I'd say, "Monsignor, you have to go to bed." So he'd get up. I remember one day sitting at the dining room table, and I said something crazy, you know, some off the wall kind of thing. And he said, "Frank, you're crazy." I said, "I know, Monsignor, but, you know," I said, "how are you going to survive in this world if you're not a little that way?" "Oh, you got something there," he says. "You got something there." I took him out one night to a social with other priests, and he said he really didn't want to go because he had blood pressure, and if he drank too much, he'd get headaches. I said, "Look, I'm gonna be your suck up tonight, and I'll make your drink will only be colored water. So whenever it's going to get made again, someone asks you, I'll push myself in. That's the pastor. Let me do it, etc." And the way home, he told me that he'd lived with other priests for 20, 25 years. It was the first time he'd ever been anywhere socially with another priest.
My goodness.
Okay, so we are told, and still, I think we're still trained to think that we're being sent in. First of all, it's kind of an insult to the young priest. I mean, the Church of Christ has made a decision, the Church of our Lord Jesus Christ has made a decision that this man is able to be a priest and to function as such. He has what it takes. And then we send him in to say, well, you're just a kid and you're going to get broken. Rather than saying, you're going into a situation, you have something to bring to it.
Yeah.
And so I think the whole thing is all screwed up, to tell you the truth. Pope St. John Paul II said in Pastoris Davos Vobis about the ontological difference. Well, the ontological difference, if you read the document, isn't for separation, it's for immersion. It's for relationship. But we interpret it as we re-pedestalize the priest. So I think that I think the issue is huge with respect to that. And some of it affects, how we relate to the other priests. The other two priests, one was a total eccentric who was a lovable man. I loved him dearly. He was a really nice man, but he was off the wall on some things, like his blessing. He'd give his blessing over the phone. I'd go in at night, he'd be in the steel table in the kitchen, making a peanut butter sandwich and blessing the peanut butter and all this kind of thing. So I used to tease him about it. And so he was a good soul. He was a really good. The other guy was a kind of a backstabber. But one time I said, the pastor, for example, and I were out one time, and we were at a funeral, and it was, it must have been a male. Yeah, it was a male, but there was a phalanx of women in black in terms of the mourners. And it was at that time, the old days, you'd shake hands with everybody along the line, etc. Well, it's just around the time they began to feel comfortable hugging priests.
Right.
So I went through the line in front of him, and they all hugged me, and he came after me, and they all hugged him. So he got in the car, and he said to me, Frank, what about this hugging stuff? I looked at him, I said, who the hell are you kidding? You loved it. Well. So we don't learn how to be human beings with each other. And when we are, we have the potential to bring out the humanity in the other one. And that's the baseline of community.
Amen.
Amen.
I was hardly ever outside of a kind of a rectory with other priests. So my first assignment, I had a couple of different pastors that were there, and there were always the pastor, myself, and at least one other, and sometimes another. So we were at least 3 and often 4. And every night before we went down for dinner together, we'd always have a drink. I'd go into the pastor's room, he had the door open, and said, get what you want, and all the rest of that. I was in New York for a spell, and once I was over in Brooklyn, and there was a pastor there that was quite an active fellow, and there was another priest in there, and they welcomed me. And it was terrific, I could come and go as I needed to. I used to get on the subway to get into, because my work was inside. I was in a parish out in Staten Island, and it was just myself and him, as I'm calling. I don't remember that there was a third priest there. I was in New York, downtown. Just right near where the 2 towers went down, and the wheels fell on the church there. It didn't break any. Well, it must have broken something. But there were a couple of guys from Sri Lanka. There was the pastor there. There was an older, once Jewish fellow. He came from a Jewish family, full of fun. And then there was another guy that he was kind of sick and not really something to. So there were 5 of us at least. There might have been somebody else. It was in all these instances. And then when my final parish, I was the pastor, and there was a priest of the diocese who had been a Franciscan, and he had some serious, I don't know if it was his heart, I'm forgetting what it was, but he had some real serious illness, which removed him from his serving as a pastor. Then he recovered, and so he came over. The diocese asked me would I welcome him to be an assistant, and I met with him. We had a wonderful time, and we lived in the same house together. He was a terrific cook, you know, and he was just a joy to work with. You know, when I die, hoping he's still alive, he's going to be my homilist, you know, whatever he has to say. So I never really had that kind of thing, experience of negativity. I was never with somebody that was really nasty or indifferent or whatever. I think it was very, very good. Now, today in our diocese, most of the guys are living alone because we only have enough priests to send one, you know, to several parishes. So in Alliance, for example, there's 4 churches there. It used to be places that were a couple of priests in each. 2 of them are a little bit more out in the rural section. Now there's one priest who is the pastor for these 4 churches who are within a certain circle, and he gets weekend help. So it's a lonely life, I would say. You know, I don't know if he was, before that, he was over near the high school. I don't know if he had an associate there, but there are very few associates now. You know, the newly ordained, their associates, and even now, the newly ordained guys are tending to opt to live by themselves. So
they opt to live by
different
themselves.
worlds.
Did you say? Wow.
Yeah. For example, there's a parish in Kent, and there used to be a priest who was up at the Newman Center on the campus. And there used to be a couple of priests up there, and then it went down to just one. He was actually a Jesuit that came out of the Jesuits, and he was there. I don't remember that he had anything with him, but then he was moved to another parish. They assigned a guy that was fresh out of seminary, as far as I remember, and he opted to live up at the Newman Center by himself rather than live down in the parish in Kent. A fellow that was there for a long time, very good, open, friendly guy. But so he's living, both of them are living by themselves. So that's become rather common in our diocese now. I think the newly ordained maybe get a year, maybe 2, depending on how they behave. You know, they'd be a couple of years, and then typically they would get an assignment to another parish by themselves.
Bob, is there some kind of support program for the newly ordained? Like they get assigned to an experienced senior priest who's good with people and stuff, and they meet with him like once a month in almost for a whole day of celebrating Mass together, going out for a meal, and then having some extended conversation, something like that. I just described a program that I was involved in helping to create for Lutheran pastors when I was at the Center for Ministry in Oakland, where they had a mandatory 3-year program for their newly ordained pastors, where they were attached to a senior priest, and it was mandatory. The Lutheran bishop of the regional church would be very unhappy if they hadn't participated, and it would make a difference in terms of assignments. I'm sort of wondering, is there anything like that, and especially from your position?
I'm not conscious that is in practice in the diocese today. We have groups of priests that go back to the 80s. Then Vincent, what is his name? Vincent, he was a Cistercian that went around and started this thing. I think it was called Genesis, maybe.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I know.
Yeah. So he came in and did a number of sessions with us, and then recommended that we form groups. And so I think the priests of my generation, by and large, for these 20, 30 years, 40 years, I guess now, You know, they've had their groups and they have been consistent with them. But I don't know that the younger guys, I don't know what they're doing. They don't show up in places that, and you know, I'm kind of out in the country here, so I don't, I'm not in the midst of a lot of the meetings that do go on. And I don't know what there is that's happening for them.
Right. Used to call, you know, the solitaries used to call it, in many cases, the lone wolf syndrome.
Yeah.
And that is a tough place that is really a tough place to be and does not bode well. And, you know, Frank, as you were describing your first parish and Bob the same way, I'm thinking back, once again, mine was weird because my first year of ordination, I was in graduate school working as a graduate assistant in a psych department. And that was because I had persuaded the bishop that this was a good way to use somebody else's money. I had a full ride and I was in a second master's program in psych and counseling. So I was in residence and, you know, I was coming and going and they couldn't quite figure out what I was up to. And I would celebrate Eucharist and be available to help out as I was available. My first full assignment was totally bizarre. The auxiliary bishop, who was a social worker, out of the blue, just called me and said, "I know you're ready for a full-time placement. We're delighted." He said, "I have the perfect place for you where you'll be able to use your psychology and counseling. The pastor is literally, he said, the pastor is a little strange." and that was the beginning of a couple of year adventure. Strange was putting it mildly. It took me a little while to kind of break through and recognize his strangeness was, no surprise, brothers, he was incredibly lonely and isolated. And he had found his own way. For him, his drug of choice was not alcohol. His drug of choice was pursuing in a kind of a totally monolithic way a crazy idea that fluoride was going to destroy the world. That's what he had decided. And his whole life and focus, everything practically that he did. Well, let me tell you, I made a quick decision. I am going to stay away from that. And what this guy needs basically is someone to love him. And so I made every effort to be kind to him, to continue. I was also continuing my continuing education again with the bishop's blessing, and that kind of helped keep me sane because I could move between my supervising therapist and my spiritual director, and to try to stay focused. Into the second year when I was there, I began to go with him on, quote, our day off. He kept a really nice powerboat down on Narragansett Sound. And he started inviting me to go with him. And I thought it was a perfectly normal thing to do. We'd go out, we'd pack sandwiches and cruise out on the bay. And then at the end of the day, go out for a nice meal and drive on back to the rectory. And basically, he was, quote, quite normal on sort of his day off. And I moved on because after second year there, because the bishop knew that with his blessing, I had he knew I was interested in pursuing a PhD, and I was ready to get launched into the program at Berkeley, at the interface program between the graduate division and psych at Berkeley and the graduate theological unit. And I had his blessing to do that. And so I moved on. And then I subsequently discovered from some priests who had been with him in the past and said, they talked with him and they just basically said, "I don't know what the hell you did with him, but no one in 30 years of his being a priest had ever been on his boat. And you were doing that sort of regularly. What the hell did you do?" And at the time, it wasn't you know, it was a kind of, I didn't say I loved him, but I treated him as a human being and I listened to him.
Mhm.
I made every effort not to judge him. I was just there with him, sort of as a colleague. And so something must have happened after that. He retired shortly after that, and then it's been many years. God bless him. May he rest in peace.
I can't resist asking, how were his teeth?
Good.
I
Well-
take it he was not an early adopter of Crest
Oh, I
toothpaste.
see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Yeah. Oh, apparently he was blessed, you know, I think genetically with good teeth and stuff, but that was he had more documentation, you know, the same way that some of us might have gathered quotes for homilies and things like that. He just had binders filled with information, and he had no formal scientific training, though he did a lot of, he was a bright fellow, without a doubt, but a mono-focused, and he had binders and folders, so there was anything on related to fluoride, including those were the days when communities were seriously considering, and it'd be up for a vote, but he'd be right there at those meetings telling them not to do it, etc. I just stay away from that and let him, I kind of think of that as sort of encapsulated mono craziness.
Mhm.
As long as it doesn't get, it doesn't get too crazy. We used to say overall pretty harmless.
But we've seen plenty of that happening in a very toxic way lately.
Of course.
Mono craziness, I like that.
Tim, you're muted, Tim.
Yeah,
So
One
my
new
question for you, okay, for you
Please.
priests is this. So we have this young pastor who after mass he stands out in front, he's very friendly and all that, but otherwise he's a really kind of brought up his ass. And so I was talking to my Cursillo group yesterday, and I said, this is the season of almsgiving. Why don't we, and okay, you guys need to tell me if I'm off the mark here. Why don't we each at some time during Lent invite Father Bean to go out for a meal and a beer or something like that? And they said, oh, he wouldn't do it. And, do they really want to go out and have a lunch or something with a parishioner? And I said, the theme of Cursillo is make a friend and bring a friend to Christ. And I thought, well, maybe is it wrong to try and develop a friendship with the priest? I mean, as a lay person, is that something that they've been trained? He's a young guy. Are they trained to kind of keep your distance from your parishioners, from your sheep? Because you don't want to smell like them, that's for sure. And so is an idea that I'm banding around with my Cursillo group is let's make Lent be a time to just build a friendship with this young guy.
And bring him to Christ.
I don't.
And
What do you think about that?
Bring
I
him to
agree with it. I agree very much.
Do it.
my quick to Tim's question was, Cursillo, you make a friend and bring him to Christ. Well, bring this guy to Christ.
Take him to lunch.
Priest.
Yeah.
Give
So you think that's okay?
Give him a
Yeah,
chance to say no.
Well, Jesus
Yeah.
thought it was okay with Zacchaeus, and I think this guy is probably much closer to Jesus than Zacchaeus was at the time.
that's a great example.
Okay.
He by himself.
Yeah.
He
No,
by
it-
himself,
it-
Tim?
Tim, why don't you lead by example?
I am going to do that.
Yeah.
It's because I didn't want to do it because I thought maybe it was inappropriate. Because I think a lot of these young guys are trained to kind of keep their distance.
That's
And maybe
awful.
maybe that's not right on my part to think that that's how they're being trained.
Well, I think every
Um,
one of us would say in chorus, in union, that's bullshit.
Amen.
Oh, Tim, well, what if he says no? So I say, if he says no, you say, Father, I'm not going to stop trying because, wonderful things happen at a meal.
oh, thanks,
That's
Frank.
cool. That's really
And
good.
I think there's a lot of, I lived alone for I'd never lived alone until my wife died 8 years ago yesterday, by the way. And then I lived alone in my first assignment was 5 months. There was 3 or 4 other priests in the house, but then I lived alone as pastor for 5 years. And I didn't really like it.
Really?
So I was out of the rectory a lot. First of all, I think there's a number of things that we forget about when we educate priests. A priest is a public figure. He is not to be obvious only in his rectory or on the church grounds. He's to be obvious in the town or the community where he lives. Now, not trying to impose himself, but just being there. So for instance, after I left the parish in South Boston, I got a call from a friend and he said, Frank, will you come for lunch? I said, yeah, I actually have the 8 o'clock mass. So I'll drive out and meet you out in Sharon at 11 o'clock. And on the way out, I said, I should get mileage for this because the group was 2 Jews, 2 Protestants, and a fallen away Catholic. So I should get evangelization mileage for this. So it seems to me the priest has to kind of move out a little bit. But on the other hand, loneliness, I think, is very, very difficult. So I've been here now since the 1st of June. I don't like it that much. I mean, it's a very nice place. I have friends in town, etc. So the week after next week, I'm moving into the priest residence in Boston.
You told us that.
I keep my house here.
Yeah.
But there's a certain element of community there that I think would be good for my physical and psychic health.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it seems to me with young people, we prepare them and say, oh, thanks be to God. They are the mediators of God's mercy and God's love on people throughout the world. But we need to send them out and get their ass kicked a little bit. I mean, where does this all come from? And, Pope St. John Paul II said that there were 4 elements in the formation of priests. Well, there aren't 4 equal elements. He says, in the translation in English from the Vatican, says that the first one, human, is the base of all the 3 others. And yet you go on seminary websites all over the country and you'll see that order all screwed up. A seminary like St. John's in Boston wants to see itself as academic. The first of the 4 elements is academic. Whereas in Pope St. if they read the encyclical, it's the 3rd. So it seems to me that we're in this kind of position in history where we're trying to pull people forward out of some of the stuff that's constrained and constricted us and driven people away from the gospel for years. And we're having a hell of a time doing it.
Norm, are you still there? Norm?
I'm here. My video doesn't work very well, but I'm here.
Frank, I just can't
Video.
agree more with you. I'm assuming most of us, if not all of us, agree. Norm, when we were in our last year of theology, right from the beginning, Norm, Charlie Herbalin, Al Kroll, myself, can't remember anybody else. Do you, Norm? We all agreed that it was going to be really hard in the priesthood, and that there were going to be many, many, many occasions of loneliness. And so we wanted, well, after everybody's supposed to be asleep, all of us went outside and went into the orange groves and met for about an hour. And we talked about how are we going to get through this? And we all decided at least we would be supportive of one another, and we would gather occasionally, and then later I found out about, what is it, Jesus Caritas?
Yes.
Well, that's you know, again, wasn't that something that the priests just decided we really need each other, we need to pray and pray for each other, and so what is it? How was it, a once a month, Norm?
Yes, it's once a month. Yesterday I was at our meeting. I'm still a member of it.
They're you know, if the diocese or the spirit of the priesthood as proclaimed in any way by the bishop doesn't do it, then, you know, priests do it for themselves. If they think they've got the opportunity to do it. Some guys don't somehow know how to initiate getting together. And, you know, Frank and Bobby, you guys were doing the right thing, it seems to me.
Do you think that if, so I can just see you guys, lights are out and you're going off into the orange groves. I was wondering, my God, in today's age, would they think that you guys were all a bunch of homosexuals that were going out there? I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing, Ned, but I thought, my God, you know, the church militant would have a field day with that.
Nothing to worry about, Tim. No more orange groves, just apartment houses and parking lots.
You know, I don't think we've gotten to that kind of cynical nature yet. Maybe we were, but when I was a deacon, you know, in these three parishes that I mentioned, I used to hug the kids and throw them in the air and bring my guitar and sing in the classrooms and outside. They say, "Oh, I'm digging Ned," and so we'd go over to a bench and we'd sing for a while, and until the principal, Benedictine Tom, called me into her office and said, you know, I hate to say this to you because I know the spirit with which you have and what you want to spread around, but don't pick up the kids anymore. Don't throw them in the air. Don't hug them. And I think that's the beginning, or at least for me, was the beginning of, you know, be careful. I'd experienced it in the seminary, as I've mentioned to you guys before, and now here it was again, and then a whole lot of parishioners and priests began to go to seminars like the one Carl Rogers had put together in San Diego that I mentioned to you guys, where there was this huge, well, we'd have 18 or so people in a pod, so to speak. And there was a very practiced facilitator who would quickly bring, you know, get all the barriers down. That began to happen. And this particular superior went to one of those experiences and called me up. I was by that time in Pomona. And she said, "I'm so sorry I said that to you. I was just uptight and following what I thought was the appropriate procedure." And now, Norm, isn't it kind of true that we're all afraid to touch one another yet again?
Well, Norm had talked about an alimony when you were chaplain there for what, 20 years, almost 20 years.
Yes.
You were always, I mean, I could see you as a huggy kind of guy. Would you do it today?
Oh yeah.
You're going to get your ass sued. You're going to get your ass sued if you keep doing that.
Nobody's accused you of, you know, impropriety.
Nobody's accused me. They know. I think people know that I'm just kind of friendly guy. I'm not looking for sex with kids. That's definitely.
Jeez, that's so.
I think that you know, something of that sort is what was behind and resulted in this priest from Slovakia that came to our diocese that committed suicide. And it was just an event of a couple of members of a family. That one of the they were both girls, and one of them was the one that was helping with the mass, and there was some kind of a reaction, not a reaction, it was just pat on the back or something of the sort, and it was fine. Family liked him, had him come over for dinner a lot of times. And then all of a sudden, because the older son, I went through this whole thing with you, he was down at the parish, and he was a deacon at this point, the pastor didn't like the way that he was conducting himself as though he was in charge, and so he asked the diocese to move him to another place. Well, then that just took the lid off of the family, and that's when they accused him of abuse of this child, and one thing led to another, and they sent him down to Texas after the thing seemed to be cleared, and then somebody picked up information from Slovakia, and so they were just kind of leaving him down in this place in Texas, which was, they weren't seeing any problem that was there, but the diocese was not doing anything. And he committed suicide. 56. He was 56. Bright guy.
See, I'm curious about your boat ride and sandwiches, and I'm curious about humor. Was humor a significant part of the breakthrough that you had with him?
Well, if you mean by humor, a whole lot of joking around, no, probably not. Though he did have, as is often associated with fairly bright folk, a good sense of humor. There's a correlation often there. Comedians are some of the brightest IQ type folk, and studies have been done. It's really clear. But he was a pretty bright fellow, and he did have a sense of humor that may have been one of his saving graces. So not really.
I'll bet though there were times you could laugh at things he would say, or share some humor with what you heard from him.
Sure, when in the usual run of affairs, even around the parish, I mean, stuff would happen that was humorous, and he had a very hearty laugh. And so that was funny. I could hear him. My apartment, my room, really not an apartment, was upstairs in what was at one time a farmhouse, and literally still had the garage had been originally the barn on the property, and so I lost my train of thought.
You're 80. You're 80. You're excused.
Welcome to the club.
This group is very forgiving, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that a lot.
Norm
Yeah.
Supanchek,
It was
you've
his
got
laugh.
that.
You were talking about his laugh.
Yes, and Norm has that hearty laugh, I think.
Yeah.
I like
Let
to
me tell
join
you.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something exciting that's going on here. We have this embryonic. Have you guys heard of the Ordinariate of the Chair of St. Peter?
Yes.
I think that's what it's called. Which is
Yeah.
and which is an effort, I guess, to kind of take some Anglicans and people like that, priests, families, and bring them into the Catholic Church. Well, we have a small group that started here in Western North Carolina about 3 or 4 years ago. It was started, and they have a bishop named Stephen Lopes, who is, I think, in Houston, and he is the bishop for the whole country for this ordinariate. And so we have this guy who wonderfully is going to be ordained in May, who was a Methodist minister. He's got 6 kids, and don't know how it happened, but he converted to Catholicism. And so he had heard about, his name is Joshua Johnson. He had heard about this ordinariate. And so he got in touch with the Bishop Lopes in Texas. And he has been for the last several years trying to create a small congregation of Protestants who are either converting or have converted to Catholicism. And so he's attracted, I think, about 75 people, and a number of families, about 75 people. And our bishop has been kind of blasé about it, but according to the rule of who's ever rule is that the bishops and priests are supposed to accommodate this group if they want to come in and have a liturgy in the Catholic Church. And so they go out and they find other priests in the ordinariate and they fly them in to Asheville Airport, and they'll be here for a weekend, and they'll say, hear confession, say mass. And they always have, every single time they have a liturgy, they have family gatherings afterwards. Either they'll get barbecue or they'll do, soul food or something like that. So it's a really vibrant, small community. Well, Joshua is getting ordained this spring, and they have been looking for a permanent location, a permanent place. And about 2 miles from here, there was a little Baptist church that the congregation just sort of dissolved, and the church was owned by 4 siblings from a family. And they put this little church on the market. It's in the woods and it's really kind of cool. Well, this community bought it. So they closed the deal this week on buying this church. And so they'll have their own place. And it's like 5 minutes from me. And I would do it in a minute, except I don't like high Anglican music. it's just the music is my problem. I mean, yeah, and I've been to church frequently in England, been to the Westminster, and just the music bothers me, but it's very appealing because this small parish, this small church, there is a warmth and there is a communion of fellowship and love for each other. And if I go to my parish, I look around and the average age is probably 75 or 80 years old. They're all people like me. You go to this, and I've been to a couple of their masses that they have, and it's all young families, people with 6 kids, 5 kids, 4 kids, and it's like how it used to be when I was growing up in North Long Beach. You go to church and it's filled with kids, right? And so it's an exciting time. It's really kind of neat because I've never experienced a church growing up organically from the ground up. You gather a group of people together in faith and in communion with each other, and then you go find the building, and I think it's just really cool. So it's an exciting thing here, and I'm so happy for this group. Now, the finances are a difficult thing. The bishop told him, well, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to finance this. You got to go to the bank. And so it requires a lot of, I guess, pledges. I don't know what a bank would say, how they do it, but it's a neat thing. And I didn't know if any of you have had any ordinary parishes in any place that you've lived. If any of you experienced that?
You want to know a little bit about who the bishop is, Stephen Lopes?
I'd love to. He went to USF.
He was a priest in the Archdiocese of San Francisco. And when Leveda came there as the bishop, he found Lopes and had him as his secretary. And when Leveda moved to Rome, soon to be Cardinal Leveda, Lopes went with him as his secretary was soon named a Monsignor and was with him for a time in Rome. And no surprise that when the ordinariate of the Chair of St. Peter was created, Lopes became its first bishop. And of course, you got that correct about it is an ordinariate created by former Episcopal / Anglican priests, their wives and families, the children, for coming into or uniting with the Roman Catholic, but they bring their own liturgy. So your comment about not liking the liturgy. One interesting fact that's very unknown, and it was a local bishop who I got to know here in the Northern California area, who told me a little bit about the background of Lopes, and an interesting fact because the bishop knew my background, and he said, and you know, his father was a priest. And I went, really? And he said, yes. And he said when he exited the canonical priesthood, he had graduate degrees and he became a university professor, and that's what his career was. And also Lopes' mother, apparently no slouch either. So, but I always thought that was an interesting piece of his tradition, which may have had something to do with the fact that he knows that experience, experientially, shall I say, of having a married priest father.
Thank you for that. But the thing that is, so I have a very dear friend. He's kind of the group leader for my Cursillo group, and he has made the decision that Bob and Nancy, and they're in their middle 60s, that they're going to go wholeheartedly into this congregation. And so I've been talking about it. I said, what is the appeal? And he said, well, they combine family, a tremendous, family, a great sense of community with each other. The priest is like this with this community, because he's got 6 kids, and so there's a sharing there. But that they really have come into the Catholic Church because they love the traditions.
Right.
And he said, he said they love the Catholic history and the Catholic tradition, probably more so than most of my Catholic friends who just are like, well, we'll take it as we have. And so it's more of a conservative group in a way. I mean, the kids behave at Mass. If the kids are screaming and stuff like that, the dad picks them up and carries them out, so that it doesn't disturb. Whereas in my church, it's like a circus sometimes. And so it's an interesting thing that's happening is and they're essentially Baptists here in Western North Carolina that are converting. They're not Anglicans, they're not Episcopalians, they're predominantly Baptists who are coming over to the Catholic Church. And it's just like, wow, this is cool. This is really cool. So I just thought I would share that with you. Kind of a good news kind of thing.
If their music is the only thing that bothers you, Tim, I suggest you get a couple of earbuds and record all the music that you like on your phone. And when they're singing something else, you play yours.
I can do that. I can do that.
Good technology, good idea, Bob.
One of the other side of that they like tradition is there, especially a number of the people in that ordinariate, which, by the way, Stephen Lopes was the first bishop, but not the first head of the ordinariate. There was an Anglican priest known as Monsignor Jeffrey Steenson, who was the first head of it. And Cardinal Law actually had a lot to do with creating it.
He did.
Yes. And but the opposite side of that they like the tradition is many of them are disaffected by what's happened in the Anglican Church with respect to ordaining women, with respect to birth control, with respect to gender issues,
same-sex marriage,
all of those into and so there's a mix in here to see exactly how this will work out in the tradition. Now, what's more interesting is when I lived in California, one of the Catholic parishes ordained an Anglican priest who served in a regular Catholic parish, not his own. And we have a couple of priests in the Archdiocese of Boston that way. They're Anglican priests who are married with families, but serve in the normal parish, not in a separate one of their own.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that may have been the parish that was in Pleasanton, Frank. I remember this was before the Ordinariate of St. Peter. This was in the time when you described it well, very traditional conservative Anglicans who were very disenchanted with the Anglican Church, and particularly with regard to the ordination of women. And that was the big movement. But at any rate, they would be received. And we had several at one time. One married. This priest in Pleasanton had 4 or 5 kids. And then there were several who were celibate who also were received, because the Diocese of Oakland back then was a kind of welcoming place. I remember my friend, dearest friend, now passed just about a year ago, who was the personnel director for the Anglican Church of Canada. And we spent a lot of time together, but also did some work together. And I remember at the time when there was the movement to receive more Anglican priests, prior to the phenomenon of the Ordinariate is a different one, but they would come in, and his comment was, "You are welcome to them. Good luck." Because they were so conservative, and they were, in a sense, such troublemakers in the various Anglican, and this was the Anglican Church in Canada, so they were causing problems all over the place. Welcome to them. Good luck, he said. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, they're doing us no favors here with regard to the fine church is back there in the 16th or maybe 17th century. That's what they wanted. And
one of my closest friends in my year in the seminary before I came back to ministry had been an Anglican priest in Canada for 32 years. He used to say, Frank, I poked out. And then and he never said it, but underneath it, that was something of a driver for him. And so he went along. He was ordained, and as happened at that seminary, frequently the bishops would come and stay for a couple of days sometimes. So his archbishop came, and he stayed, and I became kind of friendly with him. The archbishop and I were the same age, etc. We chat and all that kind of thing. So when he got ordained, I went to Canada for his ordination, and I preached actually at his first mass. And there was a reception the night before, and the archbishop and I were chatting. And so the archbishop said to me, "Well, Frank, there's some of this Anglican stuff." He said, I'm not sure if I can back him away from it, etc., etc. And so I looked at him. I didn't actually, point him in the chest, although I should have, because whenever I told him a funny story, he'd hit me on the shoulder. And I said, ouch. For goodness sake, I said, "You're the archbishop. Call him in and sit him down and talk about it." "You think so?" I said, "Yeah, of course I think so." So unfortunately, my friend died last July, so I'm not sure he ever had that kind of thing. But this is outside of that complete structure, because this guy was going to go into the Ordinariate, because at the time he was thinking of changing over. His wife was alive, but unfortunately, in the interim, she died of cancer. So he just simply was received into the Catholic Church and came in as a priest of his own archdiocese. But there is this certain sense of, how do we deal with all of this? The music's not a trivial point, Tim.
It's not trivial for my wife, that's for
No,
sure.
no, no. I don't mean it in that sense, but I mean, for example, customs and,
Yeah.
I'm interested in integrating and welcoming those people, but whose terms do they come in under?
I don't know that. That's a
Yeah.
good, I don't know that. And the other issue, which is kind of territorial, is what will my bishop in Charlotte do, or my pastor here in Hendersonville, if 30 or 40 other families or couples migrate over to that church? I mean, I heard just kind of scuttlebutt. There are a couple, and we live in a small village called Flat Rock, which is 3,000 people, and it's very wooded and not exclusive, but just kind of. And the church
we can see the woods.
And the church is going to be in Flat Rock, and so I heard kind of on the grapevine that there were 2 or 3 other friends of ours, couple of friends, who said, "Oh my God, this place is going to be 5 minutes from us, and we'd love to go to church with families, is maybe we'll move over there." And so that's a dynamic that I don't know how they're going to resolve that. I don't know that what Father Cook would say if Sandra and I, and it's not me, we're significant donors to the church, and we said, well, guess what? We're going to go over. The church name is Edmund Campion. I'm not sure who he is. I think he was one of the priests that was killed during the time
Jesuit.
During the time of Elizabeth or Henry or something.
Right.
And so that's a dynamic, that's going to happen. And so how they work that out, I don't know, Frank. I just don't know how.
I think the Ordinariate has, I think they operate on their own. They don't have to have the permission of the local bishop, as far as I know.
Right.
And you're correct, Bob. You are correct, Bob. They do not. Yeah.
So if you make that decision and you say, I'm just going to go to, because you're still Catholic, you're going to a Catholic church, you just don't like this church, you move across the border, so to speak.
How is that different from moving within the Catholic Church communities?
I don't think that, in my diocese at least, there's no attention. If people want to go to a different parish, God bless you. I hope you continue to celebrate and to be part of Catholic life.
But we have to realize
here, you can go there.
We have to realize that is a very recent phenomenon that we are still trying to come to grips with. As I'm hearing all of this, a couple of things are going through my mind. One of which is, in some way, probably getting used to synodality will help to point the direction towards how these diversities can harmonize. The early church, or some strains, the Orthodox churches really, have a certain model for this, even though I still want to maintain we need Peter. There has to be some kind of recognition and acknowledgement of the role of the Petrine ministry in communion. If the See of Peter, if Rome has any purpose, it's not top-down authoritarian. It is being a focus of union, in a sense that Church A in Constantinople knows that they are in union with Church B in Boston, because both include the Bishop of Rome in their diptychs. Whenever they celebrate the Eucharist, they are praying for the Bishop of Rome, and therefore praying for one another. Then we need to figure out, okay, how can, in union with this See of Peter, not subject to it so much as in union with it, how can we all be under one umbrella, even with different, an umbrella is a very big
Yeah.
part of my environment.
On
right
your
now.
mind.
You know, even with our differences, there seems to be an unwillingness on both the conservative and the progressive side within the church to be willing to be truly in union with those with whom we disagree.
Mhm.
And as long as, and that I'll shut up after this, as long as doctrine becomes the criterion for communion, that's not going to resolve itself. But if Jesus Christ, and maybe Jesus Christ and one particular vicar on earth becomes a criterion for communion, not necessarily union, but communion, then we may have a tool to work through, or at least live with, our differences.
Tom, why did you say doctrine can't be the uniter?
Because that divides you. If you don't believe the way that I do, well, you're
Okay.
That's the horrible thing that's going on right now.
Yeah. Did anybody remember, it was a year or two ago, I sent out a joke, which I found actually on a stand-up comic routine online, which I remember George Farrick found it quite offensive, but it was this guy who was trying to talk another guy out of suicide.
No.
And they discovered a commonality that they both believed in God. They were both religious. They were both Christian. They were both Baptist. They were both, it went on and on until all of a sudden one says, well, are you part of XYZ convention? And he says, no, I'm part of ABC convention. He says, die, heretic.
Yeah.
You want, I'll send that to you. It really is kind of hilarious. It's a really weird guy who tells it, but he gets all of the nuances, especially the religious nuances, just about right.
Do send that out. That'd be great, Tom.
And I hope we can have George Farrick as part of the conversation, because I'm intrigued by what he took offense.
Oh, well, there were a number of things that one could take offense. It was very politically incorrect.
Okay.
This guy's whole mannerism and how he was making fun of this, that, or something else.
Right.
Including
Do you guys know that behind the scenes, the Catholic Anglican dialogue has been going on at the international commission level from
40 years.
it goes,
Years.
I think it's over 50 years at this point, and it's
Jeez.
still going on behind the scenes.
Well, Dad, your buddy
Yeah. Herbie.
Brian was one of the pioneers in that.
Yes, very much so. He told us a story that he had been so groomed, prepared, educated, stayed in England for a while so that he might just drink the culture and the religious culture. And at some point he decided that he couldn't do it. And he was called in by the Pope, JP2. And he said, we have poured lots of blood, sweat, and tears into getting you into this position. Why? And he said, I've been praying about this, talking to my spiritual director about it. And I'm not the one to do this. And P just slammed the table in front of him, just really angry, and said, all right, get out of here now. But yeah, he he had the accents down with the Anglican folk. He knew the names of all these guys. He showed me letters, and I mean, he was the bridge that that was to be and didn't happen.
Well, the High Anglican Church especially has always had a penchant to go towards Rome. What I find really surprising, what you're saying, Tim, is not so much that he's a Methodist, because that's an offshoot of Anglicanism, but that you have Baptists who are becoming part of that.
Yeah.
I remember that during the Vatican Council, the Anglican observer, the official Anglican observer, was Dr. John Moorman, who was the Bishop of Ripon in England. And at one point he said, if there's going to be union among the Christian churches, it only makes sense that the leader and the center point of that union would be the Pope of Rome. And that there's an Anglican drive, it seems to me, in the high church towards that goal, where the lower church is more the Protestant influence. But Baptist polity, I mean, Baptist is an American creation, kind of.
Yeah.
Whereas,
And I
go ahead.
and I believe that the reason that I know that there are several families that were Southern Baptists that have come over. It's not because what first attracted them was friendships. They had close family friendships with some Anglicans who were leaving some of the Episcopal churches here in this community. And so it was not that they first were Anglican or Episcopalian and were attracted for those kinds of, it was that through their friendships with people who had converted to Catholicism. And so it's kind of, well, if you're going to grow this small parish in this area, I mean, we've got to be 90% Southern Baptist, at least minimum 90% Southern Baptist. And so that's your fertile ground. But you're exactly right, Frank, is that the original is to kind of get Episcopalians or Anglicans to kind of come over, but because of what these Baptists are seeing, in the love and the love for the Catholic Church that these friends of theirs have, that's what the attraction is. It's kind of like, sounds like Acts of the Apostles. You'll know they're Christians by their love for each other, or that song. I'm not sure which one.
And when you talk about Baptists, there are a lot of Baptists. The outfit that I worked for in Oakland was funded and sponsored by the pension board of the American Baptist churches. It was split off at the time of the Civil War from the Southern Baptists, but the American Baptist Church was, in those days, it's gone a different direction, I understand, in recent years, but in those days, it had Martin Luther King was an American Baptist. Young was an American Baptist. A lot of the progressive growing edge, they considered themselves much more open and much more liberal. And part of no accident that this particular outfit was funded by their pension board. It was a creation to help their pastors and families manage, especially in the early years of ministries. It was a counseling agency funded by them that eventually became ecumenical. And by the time I left the Center for Ministry in Oakland, and I had been there well on into about 30 years, we even had an interfaith dimension, so that we would occasionally have contacts with rabbis and imams who discovered that what we were doing was clinically very appropriate in terms of growth, because the model that we had came out of industrial and personnel psychology, of all things, in terms of working with people rather than a one-on-one kind of counseling session. It was a model that used vocational and psychological testing, plus a very detailed biographical statement. And people were in residence with us for 2, and in the case of a couple, 3 days at a time. And it was very goal directed and very practical. So the American Baptists were really, really quite liberal, and no surprise to me that it was a shocker at the time, but the number of American Baptist colleagues that I worked with over the years who would, some of them would go to mass on Sunday, devotion to Our Lady, praying the rosary. So many, and they would basically say what I miss in our Baptist tradition, although I'm born into the tradition, I've been there a long time, but I miss what you have, what you guys call your liturgical tradition. I miss the windows, I miss the statues. It's all the things that originally people were iconoclast, break all those statues, and the reason they left, but they've kind of come around, which kind of suggests to me that built into our human nature is a need for some kind of ritualization, no matter what.
I think that's part of the issue, is that needs some deep thinking. Namely, is that if you're an Anglican, it's one thing, but if you're a Baptist, another. In terms of your religious DNA, if you will, there is no liturgical tradition. There is for Anglicans, but there's not for Baptists.
It depends on the Baptist, Frank.
Huh?
It depends on the Baptist. I have been to.
Well, no, you're yes, but you're probably dealing with extraordinary people. But the point is that the reason that these people that Tim's talking about are being attracted to the church is not because of its liturgical tradition.
Probably.
No.
And so it takes, and it takes, and secondly, it seems to me that the whole sacramental tradition, which is woven, like veined throughout Roman Catholicism, is not a very strong point in Baptist theology. I'm not trying to be negativizing on this. I'm just trying to say what a distance they have to come in
Absolutely.
order, and to what extent the attenuation of the connection with Peter is one thing, but when you get into the guts of what it means to be part of the Catholic tradition, there are much, much, much bigger and more difficult issues to deal with, I think.
I think there's another dimension, which is the Baptists that you're talking about, Bob, and the Southern Baptists. That's a whole different group, I think, with a whole different approach. And they became very dominant. The very conservative element of them took it over and really drove apart a lot of Southern Baptists that were growing. And the Southern Baptists, as I understand it, they're losing a lot of people. So what I think you're experiencing, Tim, over there in North Carolina, there's Southern Baptists, but they're finding that what the Southern Baptist Convention is trying to do is no longer acceptable to a lot of those people, and they're experiencing something that is much richer for them in their exposure to this group that is just unfolding. So I think there's two different things that are going on there, because I think the American Baptists are much closer to Catholics than any Southern Baptist.
True.
Oh, I'm sure that's right.
That'd be right.
Well, there's one other phenomenon that is happening that I think needs to be considered, and that is a fair number of professedly evangelicals, particularly groups, are rediscovering Eastern Orthodoxy.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
And
Really?
become Orthodox, yeah. And that's been written about a bit too. And I think that it is a hunger for the externals of liturgical structure and devotional structure and all of that, and possibly a somewhat more how would I say, connected. They want connectedness with an authentic Christian tradition that the evangelical experience, dating only from the Reformation, can't really give them. And they, you know, they look behind that and they say, hey, there's something behind Martin Luther and that crowd. And what they're finding is being probably a little more attracted to the formalities of the Orthodox tradition and experience, rather than the somewhat, in some ways, more freewheeling post-Vatican II or later tradition. You know, but they're going like is it Rod Dreher?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like who
Yeah.
embraced Orthodoxy, conservative Catholic. That's an interesting phenomenon that I think has to be considered in this mix too.
Yeah, especially the element of mystery in the Orthodox churches that kind of falls to Roman precision in our tradition.
Yeah.
Well, it's just, there's just a lot of things that we've talked about today, and you know, I'm taking this podcast every day, which is the Catechism in a Year. Mike Schmitz is doing Ascension Presents, and you know, I've you guys have probably all read the Catechism from end to end, but be honest, I had not done that. You know, I don't know what I do not know what paragraph 1065 says or anything. But so this little church. So what Bob tells me is that what they love is the part that appeals to them is the liturgy. And I don't know if that is the wrong thing to. I don't know if that's the wrong appeal, but they love the liturgy of the Mass. They love the sacramental part of the Catholic Church, and you know, and you drive around here, and the biggest churches are all Southern Baptist, and they don't have much of a liturgy. You know, that the minister gets up and talks, and there may be some Bible reading and some singing and stuff like that. And so it's going to be interesting to see over the next several years how this grows, or if it grows. It's going to be interesting.
I think it will grow great. I think it's going to expand significantly. That's my hunch.
A significant problem with the post-Vatican II Catholic Church has been the first and in some ways most important, the bishops realized, document of Vatican II was a constitution on the liturgy that declared that the liturgy, specifically the Eucharist, is the summit and the source of Christian life and mission. Both of those are important, summit and source, and life and mission. And I think our Catholic faith life from hierarchy has tended to say, yes, of course, that's all very well and good. And then they sort of put it on the shelf, and let's get down to the practicalities of seminary instruction. Seminary instruction post-Vatican II liturgy still was basically how to say Mass, with sacramental theology becoming a footnote on dogmatic theology. And the two never really fully reinforced one another. And that's been one of my big disappointments with the whole liturgical life of the Western Roman Catholic Church for the past 60 years, is we never really have united sacramental theology, good sacramental theology, with good sacramental Eucharistic pastoral practice. They've always kind of been, you know, the question that was, when I was involved in diocesan liturgy, the question was always about details that if they opened the damn book, they would see it in 30 seconds. Nobody really cared about how do we live out summit and source of life and mission. Never got a question about that. How does community life, how does evangelization, how does our quest for social justice and
Pastoral practice.
passion really relate to what we do when we gather for Eucharist?
Right.
And yeah, there were communities that were that was shining forth, but a lot of it was, well, you know, we turn the mass around and we say mass in English with a lousy sound system and sort of unintelligibly, and we say something coherent in a homily, and you know, that's it for liturgy. Now let's get on.
We haven't spent a dime on music
Yeah.
and then complain about it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that often was the case. I've got my own opinion on that too, which is going to have to be the subject of another diatribe.
Okay,
I suggested once to a friend of mine that the American bishops ought to hire someone like John Williams to create a Mass of the Resurrection that could be celebrated in every Catholic parish in the United States on Easter.
That would be nice.
That sounds
that'd be beautiful.
That would have
Great.
been.
Yeah.
Because
I hope they talk about that at the synodality.
Yeah, that's an issue that's probably going to continue to fall by the wayside, because when music has, here's my diatribe. When music has been really supported, it has dominated, and it has been seen in importance over and above the quality of presiding. We have not put the kind of effort into presiding that we sometimes put into having good music. Part of it, I think, end of my diatribe is going to be the not NAPM, they called it, NAPM, National Association of Pastoral
Yes,
Musicians.
for musicians, yeah.
As a popular organization and well-funded organization within the American Catholic Church, that has dominated liturgy. It provided a great service in keeping a liturgical renewal alive in the United States, but it focused much more on music, quite rightly so, but there was no corresponding movement towards gathering clergy together to really, really work on what does it mean to preside well.
Can we set this for agenda next time, Tom?
Yeah, I agree with you.
That sounds
I
really
vote
good.
yes.
Well,
Sir.
I'll try to pull a few things together on that, and you know,
Okay, good.
get some conversation going, because
Right.
obviously my diatribes tend to be soliloquies, and
We'll break it down.
okay,
Music is so utterly important, but
presiding is more important.
But
can't have good music
obviously
without
we
good
need
presiding.
we
So you
need the
need-
harmony.
Yeah.
We
Anyway,
need the three things: presiding, the preaching, and the music.
preaching is
Yes.
the function of presiding.
That's what I think.
Yeah,
Yeah, you know, and other preachers, including lay preachers, have to relate to how the presiding goes.
Next week. Let's do it next week.
There's a little problem with next week. That is Bishop Dave's funeral. And so
Yeah.
it's at 11 o'clock. Norm, I presume you're going?
I presume so.
Okay, and you can presume that I'm not, but we're
I
going
am.
to set things up.
Shall we take the week off?
It might be simpler if we took the week off. Would that be okay with everyone?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
I'm okay.
Let's you know, Johnny suggested maybe starting an hour earlier. I would be okay with that. But it would complicate the morning.
I vote with, I think we should just take the week off. That's what I think.
Yeah, and could someone please send us a link to the YouTube so we can see the mass if we want to?
I'm sure it, yeah, I will do that. I'm sure
Okay.
it'll. be
Thank
on-
you, Tom.
I'm
Thank
sure
you.
it'll be on LA Catholics,
Yeah, okay,
lacatholics.org. But
Okay.
I'll send the link out, you know, they live stream everything on there.
yeah. Thanks, Tom.
Goodbye, guys.
All right, see you in 2
So long.
weeks.
God
Yeah.
bless. Thank you.
By the way,
Bishop
By the
Davis,
way,
Lars-
Tim, how did that high church ever locate in a place called Flat Rock?
Goodbye.
High Church, Flat Rock. Good call.
Goodbye. Gee.
Happy Lent, everybody.
All right,
God bless. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
bye-bye.
See you in 2
Take
weeks.
care.
God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye.